one of the things that I love about your book is the cover. Who made the cover? Who did?
I drew it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
I love it. The Pimp and the Great One. I love the images. I also love the fact that if you look at the cover, you think, oh, this is going to be a very funny book. And it is in parts a very funny book.
Yeah.
Because that's clearly your mode of expression. And I feel like it's a book that is dark and light. Italian term chiaroscuro, right? Darkness and light, light and darkness. And yeah, we'll get into that. Talk to me about David, your brother, and what it was like in your home growing up with him.
Yeah, I mean, there were different periods of time. I think when we were little kids, we were two small boys who were a year and a half apart in age, and we had perpetual playmates. I do think I grew up pretty early on, kind of with the general family assumption that I was the good kid and he was the bad kid. And not like my parents ever explicitly told it to me or told it to him, but I was the one that school came easy to. He was the one that struggled with stuff. He had learning disabilities and sensory integration issues. My parents from the earliest time used to joke that he had ears that took 8 months before they kind of flopped over like dog ears, and then they stood up one day. And, so he was just always kind of the problem kid. And so as we got older, that played out, that got more severe. And I was almost treated like an extra adult, and he was treated like the problem in the room that we had to deal with. And that just got leaned into over time. And yeah, his life revolved around basketball as a kid. He was really good at it. And I think, for me as his older brother, it was hard to have your kid brother be better than you at something. And he relished that. He relished being better at me in something. He would challenge me to one-on-one in the driveway, and the giddy look on his face as he was beating me and knowing there was nothing I could do about it. And so that sibling rivalry just always existed. But, and then it was probably when I went off to college that it started to turn dark. It ceased to kind of be like normal sibling dynamics, normal problems, kids fighting, boys being boys. And it took on a much darker life.
Yeah, it seems like throughout the book, your mom is in battle with herself as a mother. This is my boy, is kind of that's the statement of every move she made, which was, and I'm sure a lot of people could relate to that. That's kind of the Al-Anon piece, which is, and I love this person, or first I love this person, and they just threatened my life with a shotgun, and I love this person, and he just wrecked my household and, hit me and threw me and is in jail and all these things. But the love piece is the part that's the core component of her existence throughout the whole book.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think for her, there was the things she felt when she was angry. And then there was when the anger subsided. And, now, I'm not angry, so he's my baby boy again. And, for me, it's interesting. There's a lot of the constant fight that I used to have with my parents was that it's different for parents than it is for a sibling. And, that's what kind of got me writing and got me going, was that there's so many siblings out there that end up kind of being the collateral damage of these situations, because everything about my brother became so all consuming. We literally had to do family therapy to discuss my brother's issues because they were worried about him feeling singled out. And, that's what I ultimately had to kind of break free from, which comes with its own pain and issues and all of that stuff. But, my mom just, she saw so much of herself in my brother. And I think she was trying to heal herself in a lot of ways. And then, she would get, there would be a fight or violence or drug related stuff, something would happen. And she would say, that's it. And then the anger would subside, and then it would be, okay, that's not it. Let's go again. Let's forgive and forget and move on and just keep acting like everything's okay.
Which speaks to something I mentioned in passing earlier that you mentioned only once by name in the book, which is Al-Anon.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that at all?
The
usefulness of it, what it meant in your family.
My parents really leaned into it pretty heavily. I went once.
And for anybody who doesn't know, Al-Anon is a program, a 12-step program to support the people living with addicts.
Yeah, it was interesting because as it got bad, there's a whole period where, I was screaming at my parents that David needs help, and they didn't get it. I could count. We didn't drink in my house growing up. We didn't, I could count on two hands the number of drinks I probably saw my dad have. And so, I had a normal high school and college existence, and I experimented. And so, in so many ways, I think I saw what my brother was doing and realized, like, that's not normal. That's not just a college kid being a college kid. There's something more there. And so, I was on my parents for so long that there were problems, and they wouldn't do anything about it. And by the time they realized that it was a real issue, I had put up so many walls at that point, and I had pulled so far away from the family that when they started getting help and they started putting him into rehabs and they started going to Al-Anon on a regular basis, I supported them. And like I said, I went once and listened and was a part of it. But I also kind of sat off to the side and said, you guys do this.
Your mom has to contend with his death, essentially.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
With my brother's death?
Yeah. The tombstone for her son.
Yeah. There's a chapter in the book where I talk about my mom's addiction to my brother. And
by the way, that was really fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Great writing throughout the book. But at that point, I thought you were going to talk to me about his addiction. And then the new paragraph starts, you talking about mom's addiction to her son, David. And that was just a beautiful, beautiful way of framing that.
Yeah. And, look, I think being addicted to your kid is parenting in so many ways. And I think the craziness of addiction is it's unnatural to have to wean yourself off of your own child in that way. But, my mom relapsed hard on my brother when he got out of jail the first time. And she, leaned into the enablers in her own life. She had a set of friends that were like, David's trouble and you need to protect yourself. And then she had other friends who said, give him whatever he wants and
buy him the car.
Yeah. Get him. Yeah. And she relapsed really hard, and then he relapsed even harder. And all of his violent tendencies came out and all of that happened. And he was going to go back to jail for parole violation because part of the conditions of his probation were drug tests, which he's then started failing again. And so, but with my brother, it was never just the drugs. Then came the violence, and then came everything else.
But the drugs were marijuana and meth and crack,
whatever he could get his hands on.
Yeah,
I mean, it was there were. Earlier on in life, I remember once sitting down when we were speaking to each other, sitting down and him walking through the laundry list of things that he'd tried. And, you're amazed that he's alive.
Yeah. By the way, when he came in, he got arrested for major drug violation.
Yeah.
How many pounds of pot was that?
3,000 pounds. Yeah. It was a horse trailer full of.
Literally.
Yes.
The walls of the horse trailer.
Yeah.
Breaking Bad style were lined.
Yeah,
with marijuana, and he got pulled over. He got stopped.
Yeah, they had said, after he'd been arrested, and that's still to this day the craziest Google search I've ever had. I used to use Google to look at ex-girlfriends and see what they were up to. And I Googled, and all of a sudden there was a news story that came up, and my brother's mugshot was there, and he'd been arrested for trying to smuggle 3,000 pounds of drugs.
But you're also the brother.
Yeah,
and there's got to be just what I read between all the humor.
Yeah.
Was so much pain.
Oh, yeah.
And having to have two things in your hands really your whole life. One is loving compassion, and the other is protection, self-protection.
Yes.
And you had to do both, which is not to stop presumably loving your brother because he's your brother.
Yep.
And he's David that you were playing with as a kid. And that you always want redemption for him, I'm assuming.
Yep.
And the other side, which is, but I can't let you next to my kids.
Yeah.
And I can't let you at this family event. And you can't keep threatening my mom's life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was, it's weird. Siblings are supposed to fight, like there are movies and TV shows about that. And, my brother and I did a lot, but we were always brothers. And, I remember like before it got bad, when we were just two teenage boys who liked to hit each other. I remember thinking to myself, like, there'll be a point in our 20s when like we look back on all of this and it's like we grow up and you learn to be mature adults and you have that relationship. And, then things went off the rails with him, and you still kind of hold out hope that like, okay, he's got a drug problem. But again, movies and TV tell you full of the stories of kids and people who overcome that, and he'll be all right. And, still we'll find our peace, and that, one day we'll both have families and we'll look back on everything. And, and the longer it went on, the more improbable that became. And, I eventually just had to put up a giant wall and say, you're on the other side of this. And I'm going to try and navigate it as best as I can, because I wasn't ready to completely cut my own family off, but I definitely went in search of a new family. And, I met my wife, and, we started our own, and that was the sanity that I craved. But yeah, but you never it wasn't until the very end that I really lost. I mean, even when Zach, my youngest, was born, I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have cut him off. I started thinking about the role the second siblings play. And I started thinking about, when we were kids, and that I was the good one and he was the bad one. And that like, he got a short shift and maybe he deserves another chance and all of that stuff. And so, you eventually the wall comes down just enough, and you think about whether or not you should do it. But it's a giant juggling act, because, on the one hand, you're right. He was family, and he was my brother, and he and I had this connection, and we're the only ones who could understand what it was like to grow up in our loopy, half Catholic, half Jewish household, and all the things that came with all that. But on the other hand, he was scary, and I was determined not to let that anywhere near, my kids, not near Jess, not near anyone. I just couldn't let that happen.